integrity. A man who's ready to be commander-in-chief on day one. And a man who is being introduced by an outstanding commercial, my friend, our next president, Governor Jeb Bush.
Thank you all. What's that, Will? Thank you all. We'll let this go by, and then we'll get this warmed up. Thank you, Adam.
My pleasure.
I've not seen this. I'm going to sit down right here.
Okay, all right.
Let's see what this is. So I have no clue what that was. But I appreciate you all coming, and I appreciate my friend Adam Putnam being here. Adam has served now, he's in his second term as Agriculture Commissioner. He's a great leader for the state of Florida. You may remember him as a congressman at the early age of whatever the constitutional requirement is. I think he was in Congress probably when he was 30 or something like that, and rose to the leadership and realized that he could make a bigger difference in the state by running statewide, and he has a bright future. I can promise you that you're going to hear more about Adam Putnam going forward, and I'm honored to have his support. And frankly, I'm honored to have the support of a lot of people I got to serve with. There are 4 people running from Florida, maybe 5. I don't know if Donald Trump is a resident to avoid New York City income tax. He should be if he isn't. We have 4 or 5 people that reside in Florida, and I'm proud that probably about 90% of the people that worked with all of us in some fashion are supporting my candidacy because they want a leader. They want someone who has proven leadership skills. And whatever my flaws are, through trial and error, I've actually learned how to make tough decisions. And I think we need a steady hand in the White House right now. We're living in perilous times. Think about it. We have a president who believes that ISIS is the JV team and then allows them to create a caliphate the size of Indiana. 25 to 30,000 battle-tested Islamic terrorists. And our president and the likely Democratic nominee can't call it for what it is. They can't even utter the term radical Islamic terrorists in the same sentence. And so all of their policies revolve around something to try to deal with something that they, in their own minds, think doesn't exist. Well, it does exist. There's a caliphate the size of Indiana that wants to destroy Western civilization. They believe that our freedom is our weakness, and they'll exploit it every possible way. And we need a leader to be able to destroy ISIS, not to contain ISIS. 3 months ago, I laid out a plan to do just that. And it was grounded in common sense and grounded in the reality of, first, me recognizing I didn't have all the answers, so I went and sought them out. I had the intellectual curiosity to seek out the best minds to develop a true, meaningful strategy. And I did just that. And 3 months ago, I laid it out. And I believe we could destroy ISIS. And if we did, our country would be safer. And I hope you agree that that's the case as well. I'm sick and tired. I am sick and tired of a president that wants to divide us up. To make himself look good, he's always pushing someone down. If someone disagrees with the Iranian agreement, perhaps the worst negotiated agreement in modern times that legitimizes a regime that is the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, that allows them to have at least $100 billion of fresh capital to carry out their aims in the Middle East. They're the mirror image of ISIS in many ways. One is radical Islamic Sunni terrorism. The other is a sponsor of Shia radical Islamic terrorism that believes that anybody that disagrees with signing this deal is in cahoots with the Death to America crowd. This is how the president operates. I hope you don't want to have a divider-in-chief, an agitator-in-chief. I hope you want a commander-in-chief as President of the United States. That's what I believe we need in this country. Someone with a steady hand that understands that American leadership is a force for good in the world. The history is replete of examples of American leadership creating safety and security for ourselves and the world. America still is the most extraordinary country on the face of the earth. You believe that, don't you? I do. We should have someone that's president that believes it. And if we rebuild our military, which I laid out last week at the Citadel, these young men and women that are, the majority of which will go serve our country in leadership roles, in front of them, I got to speak about the need to rebuild our military. It's the first priority of government. We need to bring our military into the 21st century. We have pilots today that are older, we have aircraft that are older than our pilots. The B-52 continuing to be an integral part of our military capabilities. First flew when Harry Truman was president. The number of Navy vessels that exists in the arsenal of democracy, truly the greatest Navy in the world where we continue to dominate, is half of what it was the day the Cold War ended. We have antiquated training because we've cut the budget each and every year. The next president's going to have to restore our military strength so that when he speaks, and I would suggest the next president speaks a little less, with a little less grandiosity, speaks with a little more humility, but when he speaks, it needs to be backed up with the fiercest fighting force known to man. And right now, it's been cut back. The next president of the United States needs to recognize that the new threats, apart from Islamic terrorism, exist in many forms, and that we need to be vigilant. Cybersecurity needs to be upgraded. Did you all see the sorry state of affairs that took place with the Office of Personnel Management, in effect the HR office of the federal government? Some inspector general there said that there were real flaws in the security, the firewalls of OPM, and nothing happened. The net result was the Chinese were already inside our systems by the time this inspector general report took place, 6 months prior, and went about their business. And they took 20+ million separate discrete files, including apparently the security clearances of all the people in recent years that have filled out the forms, 100 pages long, chock full of information, sources and methods of people that are trying to covertly keep us safe. This laxity needs to stop. If we're serious about protecting the homeland, then we have to have the defensive capabilities to protect us and protect our grid and protect our way of life, but also the offensive capabilities to make sure that if someone does come in to try to attack us in the cyber world, that they know that we have an offensive capability to have devastating results on their systems. The only way that you can keep the peace is have the strongest capabilities across the board, and I believe we could do that. If we did that, we'll create a more peaceful and secure world. And then maybe we should go about the business of trying to take care of people in our own country. Today in America, Hillary Clinton gives Barack Obama an A for his performance. Really? Think about it. 1 in 10 Americans have either given up working or are unemployed. 1 in 10. We have the lowest workforce participation rate than we've had since 1977. Disposable income in this country is down $2,300 than the day that Barack Obama was inaugurated. $2,300. That may not seem like a lot of money for the folks in Washington that deal with hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, but $2,300 for a family is the decision of whether you can take a vacation, or more importantly, whether you can provide for a rainy day, or more importantly, whether your kid can go to school debt-free, or more importantly, maybe you're taking care of your elder mom who has dementia. Maybe you could take a weekend off and you can be able to afford a caregiver to provide respite care. It matters a lot that we have declining income for the middle class. It is not an A. It is not an A that 1 in 7 people are living in poverty in this country, 6 million more people than the day that Barack Obama was inaugurated. It is not an A that 1 in 5 children is on food stamps. It is a horrible mess. And the way out of it is the way we've always gotten out of messes, which is high sustained economic growth. Unleashing America on this challenge. Not outsourcing this opportunity and problem to Washington. Washington doesn't create prosperity. Washington doesn't create opportunity. Washington can create the environment where people pursue their dreams successfully, and that's what we ought to do. To put it in scientific terms, or biological terms, if you will, we're the host. Washington's the parasite. Parasites don't survive if the host is sick. And right now, we're sick. To restore America's greatness, we need high sustained economic growth. And I've laid out a comprehensive plan to do what Adam mentioned briefly, what we did in Florida. When I was governor, my objective was that personal income would grow faster than government income. I know that sounds like a really, crazy idea. But think about it. If everybody organized their states and local governments and the federal government organized itself that way, government would lessen. It would get smaller naturally. The demands on government would subside. It would do the big things that it has to do and wouldn't try to be all things to all people. Well, we did it. During my 8 years, the state government grew by half the rate of income growth. And disposable income in Florida grew by $1,300 instead of declining by $2,300. Income grew by 4.4%. We had people being lifted out of poverty. Our economy was growing. We led the nation in job growth 7 out of 8 years. You know how we did it? We took on some very powerful interests that liked the way it was. And we won. In Florida, you can fire a government worker for incompetence. I know that sounds like another radical idea, but that's what we need across the board. We need career civil service reform. We need to challenge every aspect of how government works so that we can unleash our own dreams onto this great opportunity of high sustained economic growth where more people would have a chance at earned success. I know we can do it because I've seen how it can be done in Florida. You know what they called me in Florida? Vito Corleone. We vetoed 2,500 separate line items in the budget, totaling $2 billion, and it brought discipline to the budget process. 8 years of surpluses, 8 years of balanced budgets, 8 years of shrinking government, and 8 years of a flourishing private sector where more people had higher income. That's what we need in Washington. We need to change the culture first in Washington. I hope we'll get a balanced budget amendment. I think the next president needs line item veto power. I think lobbyists ought to be totally transparent about who they're interacting with. There should be complete disclosure of who they're talking to. I think elected officials, when they resign, ought to go back to their communities and not stick in Washington and go out the back door and immediately start lobbying their successors. I'm tired of the complicated nature of Washington. We need to shift power away from Washington, back to our families, back to our communities, back to the states, and we'll get our economy growing again at a faster rate. The final thing I want to tell you is that my core philosophy of limited government and personal responsibility, the traditional conservative approach that has created the most extraordinary growth and prosperity that the world has ever seen, is embedded on one basic principle, and that is that life is divinely inspired. It's a gift from God. That from beginning to end, it should be respected. And that means, in the political realm, of course, that I'm a pro-life guy and that I believe in the sanctity of life. But I also believe in the possibility of life itself. That if we organized ourselves, rather than saying people are liabilities, and compel them to get in line so that some foreign, entity, in this case Washington, can solve our problems, rather than do that, say that let's try as a nation to make sure that everybody's God-given talents are reached to their full potential. Imagine that. Imagine a country that would focus on that. Our government would look far different. But if you believe like I do that life is a gift from God, then we need to cherish it and hold it up high as examples and celebrate it and be on the side of people that want to be lifted up. Last year I met a woman named Denisha Merriweather. She's from Jacksonville, Florida. Denisha grew up in tough circumstances. Her family was disrupted. She was in 3rd grade and she was held back twice in a row. Imagine that. She was angry. People that knew her at the time said that she was really lost and that she was likely to fall through the cracks like tens of thousands of young people in this country. It happens all over the place. It is a tragedy. No marching in the streets for children that have lost their way that early on. We should have more marching in the streets for people like that because they are a gift from God and they're not going to reach their full potential. Her godmother found out about the corporate tax scholarship program in Florida. It's the largest voucher program in the country. I took on some really, really powerful interests to create the largest voucher program, the first, the second, and the third voucher program in the country. We turned the whole system upside down. And by the way, Public school kids have had the greatest gains in learning in the country, in Florida, because I was a principle-centered governor that would not accept the status quo, which was mediocrity for our kids. And Denisha's godmother found out about this program, and she got to go to a Christian school based on this new program that now is the largest of its kind in the country. I recommend Iowa try it. Public schools will get better if you give more people choices, particularly people of low income. And I know what happened. I didn't see it, but I know for certain what happened. The teacher in that Christian school put their arm around that child, this angry young girl, and said, I love you. You can do it. Jesus loves you. Because it was a Christian school, I assume she said that too. You can do this. We're going to do this together. You're going to succeed. And probably for the first time in her life, an adult outside her family said that. And guess what? She overcame those 2 years of being held back. She graduated with her age group. She was the first in her family to graduate from high school and college. And Denisha Merriweather last year, when I met her, was in her second year getting a master's at the University of South Florida. If you believe like I do, that life is a gift from God, that it truly is an inspirational thing, then it's incumbent upon all of us, particularly people in public life, to tear down the barriers so the Denishas of the world have a chance to rise up. This is not about the big personalities on the stage. We're electing a president of the United States. We're electing someone who hopefully will have a backbone to make tough decisions. We'll have a heart for the Denisha Merriweathers and everybody in this country. And we'll have a brain to have the creativity to solve problems rather than just talk about them. I believe you're looking at the Republican nominee in 2016 right here. And I believe I'm the one that can beat Hillary Clinton. And I believe with your help and with your prayers, we can restore America's greatness, we can create safety and security, and we can create a right-to-rise society. I ask for your help on Caucus Day on February 1st. I've been told Commissioner Putnam is a weatherman in Florida. He's already predicted it's going to be a balmy night on February 1st. I hope that you'll come support my candidacy. I would be honored to have your help. Thank you all very much. There's a mic right there and a mic right there. And it's snowing. Someone told me this white stuff that's falling down, that's snow, isn't it? Yes, sir. Is that Yale Community College?
I was there with your brother.
You were?
And I was Secret Society brother with your late cousin, Prescott Bush III.
Uh-huh.
Yep, so I know the Bushes.
Fantastic.
You know what I call the Middle East?
What do you call it?
I call it the middle mess. That was why your dad didn't overthrow Saddam Hussein. Your older brother took a different route. Okay? And now it's more of a mess. If you became president, what are you going to do to make sure it doesn't become messier?
So the lessons learned, I think that's kind of the question. Lessons learned of the past.
Could you repeat the question?
No, everybody heard it. You heard the microphone. It's a great question. Lessons learned of the past. I think the best example of a leader that started something, made clear what the objective was, completed the task with awesome force, with a fierce fighting force where there was no doubt who the winner was going to be, completed the task and left, and did it with a coalition that truly was a coalition. This president talks about coalitions as though, I mean, he's got 60 countries supporting him. There's no strategy. There's no coalition that's acting. It's just everybody goes to meetings and talks about things. In the case of my dad, Operation Desert Storm was successful because he mobilized the world community, including Russia and China. Saudi Arabia allowed the infidels to land on their land. It never happened before and may not ever happen again. And the strategy was clear and convincing. It was decisive. And his word was kept. He did not go further than taking Iraq out of Kuwait, which was the objective. And we won and we left. And the costs and burdens for the American families and for the American taxpayers was minimal. That kind of strategy where you think about what the objective is to its completion, and you're not improvising as there's going to be changes in strategy as you go along, but you have a clear beginning, decisive force, and a clear end with a clear objective that you bring the world together. That's how America does it best. And I think as it relates to ISIS, that's exactly what we have to do. We have to be clearly engaged because, but for us who's going to be there? Who's going to lead this effort? It's not going to be the French. It's certainly not going to be the Russians. As we've pulled back, their interests are recreating their presence in the Middle East. 1973, the Soviets were kicked out of the Middle East by Richard Nixon, by Sadat in effect, but by the support of the United States. And we've had a good ride in providing security and safety because of their departure. Now their engagement creates a lot more conflict. You can't count on them. We have to do this. And it requires our leadership, and there should be a clear and compelling strategy. It should be decisive in its efforts, and we should win. And we move on to the next event. We don't prolong our efforts. There may be the need for a security force. We have security forces in Korea. It worked out pretty good. In Europe, it worked out pretty well. In Japan, there may be the need for America's military presence, but not as an occupying force. And I think that's the lesson learned. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Hi. I'm concerned about China and our relationship there, particularly their attempts to manipulate the currency and their attempts to have their currency become a reserve currency and possibly move into being a major transaction currency, what that would do to the dollar and to our place in the world, particularly our economy. And how would you handle that relationship with China?
So actually the internationalization of the currency will lessen their abilities to manipulate their currency because they won't have control over it. Similarly, like when you're a currency of record where it's freely traded, you lose your ability to manipulate the currency. China has done that in the past, but it is a recognition of their growing strength that they become. The IMF has now granted them this status. And it is a recognition that the United States better get its act together. We have this trading agreement in front of us right now. And if we don't sign it, it sends a signal to the rest, China's not part of the agreement, but to Japan and to Korea and to Southeast Asia, that we're not going to be a player over the long haul. When we pull back in Asia, every step we pull back is a step that the Chinese will move forward. And the trading system in the world, and certainly in Asia, would be changed. The rule of law would change under Chinese dominance. The whole basis of little l liberal democracy and entrepreneurial capitalism would change. You'd have a state capitalist system that would be dictated by China as it relates to Asia. So I think we need to restore our economic growth. The big challenges we face that we can control are twofold, two big ones. One is, I'd say three. One is our tax code is the most convoluted tax code in the world. We have the highest corporate tax rates. We have these inversions now where U.S. companies, bigger companies are getting bought by smaller companies, relocating. There are billions and billions of dollars overseas that have come back. They'll be taxed again because we have worldwide taxation. We're the only country of scale that has that. My plan is to lower corporate rates to 20%, eliminate the deductions, have full expensing of capital investing. So if John Deere wants to expand their operation here because they're selling effectively in Latin America, for example, that they'd have full expensing of that investing. Capital investment in this recovery is the most tepid in any economic recovery, and it's why wage stagnation exists in this country. So change our personal and corporate tax rates, dramatically change how we regulate. We should have a regulatory budget. Every dollar of extra expense from Washington, D.C. should be balanced by a dollar of reduction by the elimination of a rule. Should I be president on my first day in office, I've promised to do three things. One, eliminate diplomatic relations with Cuba, move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and eliminate all of the pending rules that Obama has put in place that are now in the courts. Waters of the United States, the Clean Power Act, the ozone rule, across the Department of Labor rules. These are rules that are stifling our ability to be competitive. I promise you China doesn't have any of these rules. I mean, their problem is perhaps economic degradation, other problems, but they're competitive for all sorts of reasons, and one of the reasons is we're not as competitive as we used to be. And we got to get our house in order before we start telling other countries what to do. And so regulation and taxes is part of that. And then the third element, which is really not necessarily completely a federal issue, is do the next generation have the capacity to achieve earned success? That's a really interesting challenge because people think we're capable, but we have a huge skills gap in this country. Huge. During the Great Recession, 3 million jobs weren't filled because there weren't people qualified to fill them. We better be serious about modernizing our job training programs, revolutionizing our education system, improving the number of people that can graduate with a 4-year degree in 4 years, lessening the debt load on young people so that they can begin the process of getting the first rung on the ladder. The next generation is not nearly as competitive to their peers as our generation was compared to ours. It's not necessarily that they've gone back, but we've flatlined and other countries have catapulted ahead of us. And if we're serious, we better make sure that we make sure people have opportunities to fill the jobs that are unfilled because they're going elsewhere if that doesn't happen. The final thing I'd say is, look, free trade works when you have trading agreements that are enforced. And when there is manipulation of currency, there's a process, and we ought to use every tool available for countries that are taking advantage of our free, open society. That means going to the World Trade Organization and trying to get sanctions on countries that do that. Or if they have non-tariff barriers that are against the rules of engagement, to enforce these rules. We have a trading, it's not free trade, it's managed trade in essence, and it has to be enforced. And I don't think our country does a very good job of doing that. Yes, sir.
So is climate change a scam that's foisted on us by the scientific community?
No, I mean, the climate's changing. It's been changing forever. The question is, how much of it is impacted by man? And how much of, and what impact is that? And how long will that impact, when will it play out? I think those questions, in spite of the fact I saw this morning, I was up at 7 o'clock and the president was having a press conference. And he basically says, look, the discussion's over. Anybody that disagrees with my nuanced, sophisticated view is an idiot. It's kind of the translation I read. And I just disagree with that. The idea that 99.9% of scientists believe that this is all decided is just not true. It's true that 99% of scientists think that climate is changing, for sure, but that's not a Captain, brilliant comment. That's a Captain Obvious comment. The climate has always been changing. So what do? Do we destroy our economy so that we lower carbon emissions? Or do we use American ingenuity to reduce carbon? I think the second, obviously, the second point's the best point. We've had a 10% reduction in carbon emissions in the last decade. Are there any marching bands celebrating that extraordinary success? No. You know why it happened, principally? The president laid claim to it in his press conference today. He actually, took credit for it. It's the natural gas revolution that has created a reduction in carbon. Our carbon footprint is the same as it was 25 years ago, and we have 30 to 40 million more people living in our country. We've done our part, and it's the private sector in pursuit of their own dreams that allowed this to happen. Almost less than 15 years ago, companies were building billion-dollar LNG plants to import liquefied natural gas from Qatar and other places around the world at $10 to $12 per thousand cubic feet. Now, domestic natural gas is at $3 per thousand cubic feet, and we have reserves were estimated to be less than 10 years at that point. Now we have over 100 years of supply. And in reality, if the price goes up to $4 or something like that, that number will go to 150. And it has nothing to do with Obama's policies. And that's why we've seen a reduction in carbon emissions. And it's a principal reason why there's any growth in the economy. I would prefer having the federal government not mandate how we hollow out the industrial core so that more and more jobs go overseas. And by the way, the simple fact is you shut down a plant here, it's going to locate in China or locate in Mexico where the carbon footprint for the same output is actually higher. You eliminate the XL pipeline, you think you're doing, great job for humanity. They're going to build the pipeline, and they're going to ship it to China where the carbon footprint is higher, and we lose economic power, they gain economic power, and the carbon emissions are higher. This is a fool's errand to be able to pursue this. It'll be great amongst the elites, but the simple fact is, the hard challenge is, how do you do this and maintain our quality of life? And I think the way you do that is to not pick winners and losers by having a venture capital arm inside the Department of Energy. That was a complete disaster, Solyndra being the prime example. But let the marketplace decide what the next generation of energy is, and allow the disruptive nature of a free society to create a more accelerated approach to that. The federal government's role is to spend money on basic research, the long-term research that only the federal government could do, to assist in finding the next generations of energy, and to help local communities prepare for the possibility of a changing climate having a problem. President Obama said today, brought up this is crazy, that the streets of Miami are flooded and there are fish flowing on them. I live there, man. I don't know what he's talking about. Do we have a challenge if the sea level rises 3 or 4 or 5 inches? Of course we do. And we should adapt to that. And if there's a problem here, then there should be adaptation at the local level, and the federal government can play a role in providing support for that. But we shouldn't turn our whole system upside down for something that I think is not as important as destroying ISIS. I would put my priority there. Yes, ma'am. Here's a mic. Ask it again.
How do you feel about allowing Syrian refugees into the U.S.?
I think that the president made a mistake thinking that Republican governors and Democratic governors were wrong to actually ask for a pause in the action here. I think it's more than appropriate because of this new reality that it's possible that Islamic terrorists can embed inside of refugee communities. We saw that in Paris. Very visible and tragic what happened. And so I think having a pause where the administration makes it clear what additional measures are being taken to make sure the screening is proper and effective. That's the first thing that we ought to do. Secondly, I believe that it's pretty clear if you're a Christian in the Middle East, your life expectancy is pretty short. I'll just tell you a personal story. My daughter-in-law, her parents are from Iraq. They're Iraqi Christians. She was born in Canada. And so I follow this carefully. Her mom's a beautiful woman. She's in Miami right now, and so we've talked about this. Mosul was a Christian city. It's a Muslim city, but with a pretty significant Christian population. And for 1,400 years, Mass was given. And no longer is. If you're a Christian in Iraq or a Christian in Syria, you're going to be beheaded, enslaved, raped. If you're a religious minority in the Middle East, you got serious problems. And you can't be put in refugee camps because the danger there for Christians is equally bad. And so I have said that we ought to have a special focus on Iraqi and Syrian Christians that are, but for, God's grace, are going to be wiped out. And I think we have a role to play there that's different. I got, Obama personally mentioned that that is un-American to say that. It isn't un-American to say it. By the way, refugees, the whole law as it relates to screening refugees requires screening for religious purposes. And a Christian is not an Islamic terrorist. That part I kind of know. I just, that you can pretty much take for granted. We should screen people, but ultimately the final answer to this is creating safe zones in Syria. That's what we have to be doing. Only America can lead in this regard. If you create safety zones there where people are protected, and you are allowing the building up of a Syrian-based army that will lead the fight with our leadership and support, that is the proper approach to deal with this. Because if not, the world's going to be dealing with millions of refugees stuck in camps that are breeding all sorts of problems for the next 2 generations of time. Yes, sir.
Appreciate what you said about pro-life. I have a question about Terri Schiavo.
Yeah.
Tragically, she was killed when you were governor. I've read that you sent state troops, at one point sent state troopers there to rescue her or to bring her some kind of protection, and they were turned back.
No.
And ultimately she was killed. And I'm just wondering, a crisis is a test. And in that one, it happened, you know, I agree with the intervention, but it did not go far enough. As you look back at that, do you regret how you handled that situation, and what else could you have done?
Great question. Does everybody know about the Terri Schiavo case? It got national attention. No? It's a woman whose husband who collapsed and was unconscious. Some people believe she was in a persistent vegetative state. Others disagreed with that. And her husband actually got an award, a medical malpractice award, to provide care for Terri Schiavo, and then shortly thereafter decided that he wanted to take another path in his life and began the process of trying to take away her food. And this court case went on for a while. We first intervened by passing a law that allowed for the state to become the protector of her, whatever, the guardian of her, and that lasted for a year before the state Supreme Court ruled that unconstitutional. The federal government intervened, and that was ruled unconstitutional, and our law did not, basically the Constitution of the state of Florida required, compelled, allowed a judge to take the feeding tube out of her, and she died of starvation for 13 days. I took every step I could take within the Constitution of the state of Florida. I did not take any steps that would violate the Constitution, the United States Constitution or the Constitution. And trust me, brother, I was criticized far more on the other side of this debate than you're the first person actually that I've seen that suggested I didn't go far enough. Trust me. And it broke my heart that a person whose parents would have taken care of her and loved her with their heart and soul without state support, that was the commitment, were not allowed to do that. It was heartbreaking to see it. And the notion that somehow, you know, people were saying, well, you can starve to death and you're in this condition, you won't feel it. I called neurologists and people that actually are experts on this. They said it is the most excruciating pain that you can imagine. So I can assure you this was a very, very difficult time, and it breaks my heart I was not successful. But when you put your hand on a Bible to swear to uphold the laws and the Constitution of a state, or if you're President of the United States to do it, you better be serious about that as well, because the rule of law in this country continues to be something that keeps us extraordinary and exceptional. And I did everything I could. It didn't work out, and it does break my heart. Yes, sir. Then we'll go over here. I haven't seen anybody raise their hand over here, so someone's got the urge. You're next.
Do you think a vice president could be given more governmental power and duties to help the president? I always feel that he's more of a token, but I think it would be a good idea, like in a football team, to give someone more power and more duties to orchestrate different things within the government.
I don't think you need to change the Constitution. I think a vice president should be a team player. I mean, they should be completely as part of the team. There are great examples of that. Perhaps the best example is that of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, where my dad played a integral role, to the point where I think it was every Tuesday or every Wednesday they had lunch. My dad had a rule that he would never say what they talked about, but they had this relationship built on mutual respect and trust, and ending up, I think, after a while, just more than that. I think my dad loved Ronald Reagan, that his loyalty was proven out, and as a result, he was given responsibilities that allowed him to really add value to the relationship. That kind of relationship, I think, is really important. And should I be elected president, I would have my vice president. I think she will be a great partner. I mean, did I say that out loud? We always talk about this with one gender in mind. I think we're reached the point, I think, in our country where maybe we should be a little less gender specific about this. He or she should be an integral part of the team. And frankly, the one important element of selecting a vice president candidate is whether he or she is qualified to be president. Everything else is secondary. It's important, but it's truly secondary. The one problem you can get into is if there's a perception that your vice president is not capable of being president from day one. That has to be an element of this. And by that very nature, if you're picking someone that is qualified and is perceived to be qualified that way, you automatically, I think, assume that they'll be taking more responsibility. I'm not talking about anybody. I'm just saying, I'm seeing that's an issue that, there's a lot of downside for vice presidential candidates. They don't have an easy job, and there's not much upside.
I want to get into trouble.
You want me to get in trouble?
Yeah, I know.
Anybody over here? Yes, sir.
There's a lot of candidates out there. When this first
You're not kidding.
when this first started, and it still is, I think the reason I'm here, I gravitated towards you as the leadership, but also you seemed, and I'm not sure if this is a good word, a compassionate conservative. It seemed like you care about people and things associated with it. I've watched the debates, and maybe you said this before, but I've not heard before the three things that you would do when you were president. And I don't want to ask this in a bad way, but it seems to me like, so Cuba. Well, that might be important to a small segment of the population. For me, it's not important.
Right.
Moving the embassy, again, may be important to a small segment, but not important to me. Now, the job growth and those things is important to me, and I think it's important to a lot of people. I guess what I'm interested in is there seems to be, and it seems to be documented, there's a huge gap, and it's growing between the very, very wealthy and the people that aren't.
Yep.
So I guess it's a long ways to come to. What are some specific ideas other than give big business a tax break to lessen this gap associated with?
So first of all, I was answering the question on day one. So that's the afternoon. And just to make my point about Cuba, it may be more important to me than to you. I respect that. But it's a signal of that your friends are your friends and you have their back. And your not so much friends need to earn that friendship by their actions. And that's the signal of moving to Jerusalem and moving back to an interest section rather than embassy. So just wanted to clarify that. But the first objective, I think, of the next president is to forge consensus again about solving these big problems. And I talked about ISIS being one of those. Foreign policy, we got to get back in the game. Our leadership is really missing, and that's why I think we have such an insecure situation. Domestic policy requires working with Congress. And so whatever the policies are, and I think tax policy is one of those places where you give people a chance to keep, have more of their income. Entitlement reform is going to be one of those things because the next generation, beyond 10 years out, effectively, that people that have it today, we can preserve and protect it. But 15 years from now, people expecting it aren't going to have it, not in the form that we have. If we do nothing, there will be cuts in benefits for Social Security that are roughly equal to 25% of the benefits. That's the law. Doing nothing is not an answer. So we have to figure out a way to forge consensus there. And across the board, that requires, other than regulations where a lot of this can be done by